Well, hello, everybody, and welcome to this Workplus Exploring Apprenticeships webinar. I'm Wendy Austin, and I'm very pleased to be hosting this today. I'm always really interested in apprenticeship programs, both the actual program and the webinars as well, because when I think back on my own career, that's what I was. I did an apprenticeship with the East Antrim Times. I served my time, I did my indentures, and I moved on from there. And it was absolutely the best journalistic training I could ever have had. So I'm a really big fan of this whole scheme. So I hope that today we're going to be able to give a real insight into the benefits of hiring an apprentice. And of course, we'll also address the challenges and how these can be overcome. Now, I'm guessing that while some of you may already have engaged in the apprenticeship system, there'll be some as well for whom it's a whole new ballgame. So we're aiming to inform you today, to bring together some really good cutting edge research, experience from both the employer and, of course, the apprentice's point of view. And we'll have government input as well. And there's quite a lot of that going on at the moment here. Of course, we'll also let you know how Workplus fits into all of this, and we'll remind you too that there's still good time for companies to come on board for the Workplus 2022 campaign, and we'll be hearing more about that. Now, before we really get started, I'd like to say a few big thank yous. Thank you to CBI, to Belfast Chamber, the Northern Ireland Chamber, Women in Business and Catalyst for supporting this event. Now, the format of the webinar will be a panel discussion for about 30 minutes or so. Then there'll be an opportunity for your questions, and we aim to finish the session at 10:55. Now, all of the attendees will be muted, but please will you type your questions into the chat area, and we'll try and pick up as many of those as we possibly can in our conversation. And the session will be recorded. It's being recorded now, and it'll be posted on the Workplus YouTube channel as well. So who's with me today? Well, we have a great panel. We've Richard Kirk, founder and CEO of Workplus. Richard's passionate about changing how our culture views apprenticeships. And since 2016, Richard and the team at Workplus have worked with over 100 companies to grow apprenticeship opportunities here in Northern Ireland. We've Martin Harvey, practice manager at Atkins. Martin's a civil engineer. He's been involved with Workplus since its inception and has played a pivotal role in helping Atkins to embrace and grow its apprenticeship culture in Northern Ireland. Emily Austin is engagement director at the St. Martin's Group. She's also a director of the Association of Apprenticeships. Now, Emily has more than 20 years experience as a talent specialist, and for 10 years has worked in the apprenticeship sector. As head of apprenticeships at Lloyds Banking Group, she led the bank's apprenticeship programme and schools engagement strategy, overseeing 5,000 apprenticeship starts across a range of disciplines and levels. And more recently, Emily was client director for apprenticeships at Capita. Paul Bryans is head of apprenticeship delivery and performance at the Department for the Economy. Paul's been involved in apprenticeship training delivery for 8 years and is currently responsible for the oversight of the department's apprenticeships and higher level apprenticeships training programs. More than 9,000 apprenticeships are registered currently for training on programs funded by the department, which is a pretty good number, isn't it? And last, but very definitely not least, Jane McMonigal, who is an apprentice with Atkins. She's currently studying for an M.Eng in civil engineering at Ulster University. And one of the major projects that she's worked on is the Belfast Tidal Flood Alleviation Scheme, which was commissioned by the Department for Infrastructure Rivers section. Jane's from Derry, good girl yourself, and attended Northwest Regional College and Thornhill College too. So it's a real pleasure to have all of you with us today, and actually, frankly, to have this whole bank of knowledge that we're going to be able to tap into between now and 11 o'clock. So just to kind of set the scene at the start, if I could go to you, Richard, I mean, this seems like such a timely session, given that everything that you pick up at the moment, every program you see or listen to is talking about how there are lots of jobs out there, not enough people to fill them, and that real skills gap, what people used to talk about as the war on talent. I never quite got that. I think it probably should have been the war for talent. But order books are full, companies are struggling to recruit. What are your thoughts on that, and what role can the whole apprenticeships programme have in meeting the skill needs?
And you're exactly right. We're having real difficulties in Northern Ireland, helping people get into sectors that are growing really unexpectedly. Manufacturing output is up 40% in this last quarter. IT, financial services, professional services continue to perform really well. And the difficulty is that we just don't have a large enough talent pool of those skilled workers, people with maybe 2 up to 10 years experience. And we're seeing firms that are really essentially going to other firms and trying to get people to come to work for them, and that then leaves a problem with the other firm that's lost that talent. So what we've heard in the last probably 18 months, even from the Prime Minister to ministers in Ireland and also here in Northern Ireland as well, is that the apprenticeship system is a better way for those businesses to grow talent from within. And maybe the talent isn't out there that's skilled. They may have to pay through the nose to bring that in. And what we're helping 45 businesses do here in Northern Ireland is to explore apprenticeships, to look at that as a way of bringing people in where their attention is really high, and also you can mold them into the people that you want them to be. And it's a better story, not just for young people leaving school, but also for people retraining. Because if you're sitting in that role in a sector that's maybe struggled during COVID, maybe all this announcements about new companies coming here looking for graduates. Well, if you don't have a degree in the right subject area, that's going to be bad news for you. Whereas if, as an apprentice, you could move from one job into that growth sector and get that degree, that qualification at the same time as working without stepping out of the labour market, whenever you've maybe got mortgage, rent, family commitments. So it's a better news story for people wanting to move careers, especially with higher level apprenticeships, which are open to all ages now.
It's interesting that you mentioned that fact, because when I was thinking back, when I was 21 when I went to the East Antrim Times, and actually I was too old, but I'm glad to say that they took me anyway. But there is a bit of a perception that it's something that you do when you're 16, isn't there?
There definitely is, and we're seeing that school leavers are really choosing it more and more. And Jane is an example of someone who came in as a school leaver, but it's getting that message across that it's not just in the areas that we would know: carpentry, joinery, hair and beauty, motor vehicle, electrician. Those are the 5 that if you ask anyone in the street, they would probably the ones they name. But there are many pathways, over 100 pathways that can be used by employers to bring in new talent. And it's great news that they're now opened for higher level apprenticeships up to all ages. And the hope is that all apprenticeships will be open to all ages within the not too distant future.
I mentioned this cutting edge research in my kind of introduction there, and that's been carried out by the St. Martin's Group and Emily Austin. We're delighted to have you with us today, Emily. Maybe you could take us through this. I mean, you've done this extensive research into apprenticeships. If you could share some of the key findings with us, I think that would be really advantageous.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Wendy. I mean, the St. Martin's Group, just to introduce it, is a very small membership organisation that was set up a couple of years ago with the primary objective of increasing participation in apprenticeships and providing evidence-backed solution and data and research to policymakers in advance of policy. So this was one of those things. And actually it came as a result of talking to officials about what data would they find most useful. And there were 3 things. They wanted to understand the upfront investment costs an employer needed to make. They wanted to know in business terms what the return was for apprenticeships, and they wanted to know what an individual could benefit from once they completed. So that's how the research came about. And I've got a couple of slides here that just show the sort of key findings. But one of the first things we looked at was costs. And taking sort of wages, taking training time, taking line manager time, sort of looking right the way across the UK at all the different funding mechanisms and incentives that were available, we could estimate how much it would cost an employer to employ an apprentice right now in the UK. And what some of those hidden costs were: things like recruitment, things like membership of professional associations, travel and expenses, etc. Things that actually government funding doesn't pay for, but the employer needs to put in place to ensure the apprentice has the right experience. And so what that came back is a cost of, on average, across all apprenticeships, £32,000. What we then did is say, well, actually, is that investment worth it? So when you consider the productive contribution of an apprentice throughout their training period and beyond, was it worth it? Sorry, Richard, and just to go back one. And what we found was, yes, actually, the productive contribution of an apprentice, even during their training period, outweighs the initial cost and upfront investment. And actually, apprentices can deliver a return in the training period, a financial gain of £2,500 on average, but in some cases that's significantly more. So that was a big finding there. We then looked at the business benefits, and perhaps one of the biggest things that came out from us is that the percentage of employers who currently employ apprentices, 98% of them said, yes, okay, we understand financial gain, but actually here's all the additional benefits that apprentices bring. And you can see there, just as we've been speaking about, the top benefit that employers cited was apprenticeships help to address critical skill shortages in my business. And there's some others there that you can see on the slide, but we also had commentary around improvements to service delivery. They contribute apprenticeships to higher levels of client satisfaction. They bring fresh perspectives and enthusiasm. So these were real business benefits on top of some of the HR benefits that we already know, like increased retention and engagement. So this was a really good news story. And then the sort of third element I mentioned was, what were the benefits to the individuals? Sorry, Richard, I hadn't quite finished. And if you are an apprenticeship completer, you outperform the labour market in a number of areas. So you are less likely to be unemployed. You're more likely at the moment to be in full-time work. You're more likely to experience a wage premium between, for example, those who complete and those who start an apprenticeship but don't complete. So there's lots of benefits to an individual of completing an apprenticeship as well. And then finally, obviously, the knock-on impacts there to the economy. Sorry, Richard. I'll let you know when to move on. That might be easier. The knock-on impacts to the economy. So, government savings on out-of-work related benefits, government savings on tax that's generated from apprenticeships being in work. And I think what this research says is, yes, there's benefits to business, but actually individuals and the economy are benefiting as well. Thanks, Richard. But considering, the financial gain and the additional benefits, the research points to the fact that actually apprenticeship starts have been down, and some of that is caused by COVID, but some of that had been pre-COVID. And why? We wanted to find out why. And we asked businesses, what were the barriers? And this was done from a survey of 1,000 businesses and HR decision makers. And 80% of those reported barriers. And while some of them had gotten over those barriers to go on to hire apprentices, actually those that hadn't cited perception of time to manage the apprentice, identifying right programs and administration as the top 3 barriers. None of which are financial, by the way, but all related to the fact that a lack of communication potentially, or just a perception around what's needed is probably the key barrier there. Having said that, 60% of those businesses who didn't employ apprentices are thinking about doing so right now or considering it for the future, and we took that as a really positive finding as well. We did look at, thanks Richard, we did look at the impact of the pandemic on starts, because obviously starts declining, sort of exacerbated, if you like, by COVID. And the most prevalent thing during the pandemic for businesses was furloughing apprentices. That's how delivery was impacted the most. But a quarter of businesses said actually it didn't have an impact on their delivery. And of those businesses where it didn't have an impact, 62%, over 62% agree or strongly agree that apprentices have been beneficial during the pandemic. And, many of our members at St Martin's Group saw that. So NHS is a member, the Co-op group is a member, all of which have deployed apprentices to frontline roles during the pandemic that they simply could not have managed without. So huge piece there. I think they're probably the main findings, but I can circulate a link, Richard, through you to the main report.
That's really fascinating, actually, Emily, to hear all of those results. And I mean, you have extensive experience in apprenticeships in very different organisations, both as an employer and as a training provider. What was it about those findings that most surprised you?
Yeah, I think actually there's some elements that didn't surprise me and I was glad was there, which is the benefits. I know from working in the industry what the benefits are. So it was really nice to see that confirmed. I think one of the surprising elements for me, though, was the barriers. So even though I know they exist, it was the fact that the top three weren't directly financially related and actually were a lot to do with just limited communications and myths that still exist. Richard touched on at the beginning about, you ask somebody in the street what you think an apprentice would be, and actually it's not really reality and what it is. So I think those barriers surprised me slightly. A big surprise to me was how quickly a business can recoup financially and get that financial gain, even during the training period. I've seen a lot of research that talks about the benefits post-completion, which we know, the apprentice goes on to do and progress really well, but actually that can be realised a lot earlier than a lot of business had anticipated. So I think they were the main things for me, Wendy.
So how do you move on from there then? When you take those barriers that even you were slightly taken aback by just that kind of lack of knowledge, or maybe lack of knowledge of how to find out about what to do next. I'm just kind of reading between the lines, but how do we move to a situation like Germany where apprenticeships are normal? What practical steps are necessary to improve the success of apprenticeships?
So I think there's a few things I'd call out. I mean, one is we know the financial incentives offered by governments have been really helpful in getting businesses to engage with apprenticeships. And we definitely call for that to continue, even though we know the barriers aren't necessarily financial. At least a business can see there's financial benefit there, but also we need to do something more about communication. I think you need the two. And on that communication, it could be as simple as those that connect with particularly smaller businesses like Workplus or other large employers through their supply chains, or indeed training providers and colleges, have got a role to play in simplifying the system for those that don't engage. So I think that's a pragmatic step, is how do you upskill those parties and invest in those parties to then go and deliver that message to other businesses. I think also for me, there's still quite a lot of work to do around perception at an individual level, whether they be school leavers thinking about their next steps, whether it be people displaced through the pandemic that could use apprenticeships to retrain and reskill. There's something there around a role we've all got to play collectively in talking through some of those individual benefits. So did you know you're more likely to be in the employment market? Did you know you're more likely to be in full-time work? It can lead to a prestigious job. I think there's been research recently from UCAS that suggests only 8% of students think apprenticeships lead to prestigious jobs, and that's just simply not the case. And we've all got sort of a collective role whenever we speak about apprenticeships to change that narrative. And I think sort of finally for me, the big thing at the moment is protecting those who are currently on an apprenticeship programme, who are going through what's been quite a disrupted time for them, come back into the workplace, have the pressures of their apprenticeship to then complete. And actually we're seeing some mental health and stress issues. And we've got a duty to kind of protect and look after that cohort, because actually if they don't complete, it's not only them that go on to not realise the benefits individually, but actually you create an issue for the apprenticeship brand all over. And then that makes it that employers and government really, I suppose, will find it challenging to make the business case for apprenticeships. So we've got quite a lot to do to protect the current cohort as well, Wendy, I think.
Fascinating, I must say. That's all really interesting. Take a bit of a swerve here for a moment. I'm really keen to hear from Jane, actually, who's on all of our screens. And as I said, Jane is an apprentice with Atkins at the moment. What was it, Jane? It's lovely to have you with us, by the way. What was it that swung it for you to go down the apprenticeship route?
So I left school at AS level, and then I joined my local college, and it was there that they kind of discussed that apprenticeships were an alternative route to full-time university. So I just thought I may as well just apply for it at the same time. And so I got 2 offers and then started with Atkins in August 2018. And so for me, the thing that really just that did swing it was just that I didn't want to be in full-time education anymore. I wanted to get experience, have an independent income, and get the degree at the same time. So apprenticeship was the best route for me. Well,
that sounded like it was a kind of perfect match for you. I mean, did it go down well with everybody? I wonder, I mean, were maybe your family had thought you were going to go to university, maybe your friends were going to university. But what about that whole side of things?
My family were really supportive of it because, well, my daddy did a plumbing apprenticeship, so it's completely different, but it's still, he was familiar with the process and he was working in the construction industry. So my family were really supportive. My friends just weren't really aware of it as an opportunity or a kind of alternative route, but it's been good feedback, and it's good to actually just inform other people that there is different routes for you to go down.
That's an interesting point. I mean, are there some of them that are a bit jealous? I mean, I do remember quite clearly, and it was a very long time ago when I was in my really quite nice flat in Larne. I know we won't go there. But my friends who were still at university, who, you know, were scratching around for their rent, were hugely jealous of my £1,100 a year that I was being paid. And you must have friends who are looking at their student debt and who are looking at you and thinking, hang on a minute.
Yeah,
Jane's going to get this degree and it hasn't cost her anything.
Yeah, well, I moved in with my friends whenever I moved up to Belfast. So I still kind of felt like I got the university experience. But whenever they were getting their student loans coming in at the start of September, I was a bit jealous. But then towards the end of the year, whenever theirs fizzled out and I was still getting a steady income, definitely was worth it. And yeah, they have to see part of their wages now getting taken away to their student finance, which I obviously won't have to do. So yeah, that's good.
So it's a bit of a win-win for you, really, by the sound of things. Mm-hmm. And you got to work on the big tunnels as well.
Yeah.
We'll come back to that in a moment. If I could come to you, Martin, I mean, you've been involved with Workplus right from the start. And you've heard that research that Emily has been taking us through, which was fascinating. I mean, to what degree have you seen the benefit at Atkins of apprenticeships, apart from Jane, of course? But
of course, I mean, in most part, yes, I would say I agree with a lot of the things that Emily has said. The skills shortage is something that has been a concern, as we've alluded to already, and addressing that has been the key thing for us in moving into that sort of apprenticeship space over the last number of years. And it's allowed us to tap into that wider potential employee market, which has been great. The value for money point has been made, and of course, yes, but for us, this is really secondary to that wider talent pool, which is key because, again, as been alluded to today, there's a war for talent, Wendy, to coin your phrase, in terms of trying to get the right kind of people into the organisation at all levels. And I suppose lastly, and it was touched on again by what Emily said, that the diversity in our workforce, which is really important to us, has been great. And apprentices sometimes come from a different demographic than the average graduate. And again, whether that be age or other things, and that adds something to our business. So I think all the benefits have been well seen by us and very similar to what Emily has flagged.
So how do you get other companies to see those benefits as well? How do you, as Emily put it, change the narrative here so that those companies that really haven't up to now gone down this route, maybe some of the people who are with us today are in the 60% who are now thinking of doing so. How do you convince them that it is the right thing to do, and what needs to change to get the numbers of companies to increase?
Again, I think it's been touched on, but it's around this awareness piece. It was something that Jane mentioned and Emily mentioned as well, that the normalisation of apprenticeships as a genuine career pathway, as an alternative to full-time college or full-time university or straight into work. It seems to have sort of fizzled out apprenticeships as one of the things that people consider as a normal way to get into the world of work. And a break in the perception, and it was Richard that raised it at the start, that apprenticeships relate to sort of traditional trade type roles, where they're a lot wider than that nowadays. And from a financial point of view, I'm not an expert in this, and maybe others in the call will comment, but I understand that there's a difference in the way that universities are funded for apprenticeship places compared to full-time places. So there's various parts in the supply chain. It's not just employers that have a part to play. Obviously, the education sector is key in the delivery of the apprenticeship package. And I think there's a lot that we as employers could do, and I'm sure the department can do in terms of helping to shape that overall apprenticeship offering.
I'm sure you're right. Actually, it's a good point at which to bring Paul in, who is from the Department for the Economy. And Paul, I must say, I was really amazed when I saw that only 10% of companies in Northern Ireland employ apprentices. There was a time when almost every manufacturing company or kind of industrial company would have had apprentices, but as Martin said, it had kind of fizzled out a bit. The department's doing quite a bit to encourage it at the moment. I mean, what can you tell us all about what is going on and what the Department for the Economy is doing on this?
Yeah, thanks, Wendy. In part, the profile of apprenticeship opportunities in Northern Ireland is a reflection on the types of businesses we have. So quite often, the vast majority of businesses that we have are micro businesses, sometimes employing less than 5 people. So it's understandable that an apprentice may not always be the best fit. And then we have a move from the traditional industries into more high-tech areas. And I think the perception of apprenticeships being trades is a cultural thing that was built up over generations. So it will, I acknowledge it will take us a while to change perception, but we have this sort of ideal situation where we have parity of esteem. An apprentice is a highly regarded option for young people. In terms of the government intervention, in some ways the easy answer is what they said. Emily outlined the benefits confirmed by Martin, and what our job to do is, in terms of shifting the balance from costs and benefits to, and it's just a subtle thing, to investment and return on investment. So in terms of the Department for the Economy, our investment, our heavy investment of around £25 million a year is based on a business case, and that business case is predicated that in terms of the apprentice, the employer and the economy, we get the return on the investment, and the return on the investment as in the benefits that have already been outlined, particularly in the contemporary context, whereby, again, Richard touched on it, I totally understand that an employer would like to recruit someone who is already qualified and already fully competent. The context that we're in now is that's not always possible. So it shifts the perception of to this grow your own, and to coin a phrase. So it's encouraging employers to think about this investment. So if you recruit someone who's not yet qualified, who's not yet fully competent, well, then there's a requirement on the employer to invest a bit on the job training. And then that's where the department complements that by funding the off-the-job training aspect. And just to return briefly to the point about young people and the transition from schools, I think we have a tremendous advantage in Northern Ireland in that we have a really strong careers service infrastructure, both in schools and colleges and universities. And I would encourage any young person to engage with the careers advisor to look at the pros and cons of the different pathways. So further education, higher education, other forms of employment, and then including an apprenticeship. And for those who do choose the apprenticeship option, really for young people, what we're talking about is building on what young people can already do, which is learn. And the difference with an apprenticeship, it's taking that on-the-job learning, combining it with the off-the-job learning, typically day release, which is what the department funds. And again, to coin the phrase, and Jane has already mentioned it, earn as you learn, so has enormous benefits if it's the right option for the individual.
And it's interesting when you talked about the different aspects of what somebody brings when they're fully trained and, as you put it, fully competent, or maybe not fully trained and not yet at that level. But the way that things are now, I suppose it's partly a matter of encouraging employers to see the advantages of bringing people in who have a very different way of looking at things, and who maybe, you know, given the whole Generation Z thing, I can never remember which one's which, to be honest. I'm sorry, that's kind of old age creeping in, but you know, there's such a different attitude there. And there's no point in businesses thinking that they can just keep on with people, who are people like us in inverted commas, to get a bright, different person in on an apprenticeship must be an enormous benefit to almost any business, Paul.
Absolutely, and it is changing in terms of workplace practices, changing work patterns, changing flexibility. We're all, as far as I can see, working from home. Who'd have thought it, 5 years ago? So obviously the apprenticeship model needs to move with the times as well. But it is back to this thing about bringing an apprentice in is an investment, but as we've heard, there is potential for enormous return on that investment.
What role does the government see itself playing in encouraging the 90% of companies in Northern Ireland that aren't currently having apprentices to do that? I mean, Emily was talking about how we need to change the narrative. What role does government have in that?
I think there's two key things. One is in terms of all of this demonstrated benefits in research, keeping that high on the agenda. And we have various strategies and policies. The 10x economic, the executive's 10x economic strategy. There's an associated skills strategy, economic recovery action plan. All are featuring the value of skills and the value of apprenticeships in particular. But the outworking of that, the bottom line is government's role in this is about providing the infrastructure for the training. So the colleges, the universities, and we have an excellent bank of private training organisations that we work with in a contract basis. So providing that infrastructure for training. And then importantly, the funding for training. Currently at level 2 and 3, which is around GCSE and A level, our focus for funding is at 16 to 24-year-olds. For higher level apprenticeships, which is open to all ages, but starts at a foundation degree level. So typically you're talking about good A-level students there. That's all age. And I mean, moving forward, Richard already touched on, it's about putting plans and securing budget and the business case to extend that level 2 and 3 funding for all ages, and also potentially extending. The public sector is currently excluded from our apprenticeship funding. So we'll be exploring opportunities to extend to the public sector, but in areas that will have mutual benefit for the private sector. So some of the things that have come up so far is apprenticeships in audit, apprenticeships in procurement, and apprenticeships in veterinary science. So obviously, if we work with the public sector to bear the development costs of those and whatever, they're things that will be available to the private sector as well. I think we also have a role in straightforward promotional work. So we'll be do television advertising at the most basic level. We have information in NI Direct and NI Business Info. But one of the big things that works, and it complements the kind of broader research piece, is highlighting local success stories, local case studies, so that local companies can have that sense of identity. The company down the road, or the recognised Northern Ireland brand of our company working with the apprenticeships. And we do that quite successful through our annual apprenticeship awards, which is really an opportunity to highlight the good local practice.
Well, so speaking of local success stories, Martin Harvey's still with us, of course. I mean, it's quite likely, Martin, that some of those with us this morning are in the 90% bracket of companies who haven't yet engaged in apprenticeship recruitment. So what would you say to them about the benefits and the reasons why they should look at going down that route?
Yeah, I mean, I've highlighted some of the benefits, and it builds on what Emily said earlier. And for us, really, it's about the access to that wider talent pool. And I can't see from any other business's point of view why that wouldn't be something they would consider. And whilst it's been talked about today about bringing people in who are, skilled and competent, we all have a role to play in developing skills and competence. And bringing apprentices in, as you said, young people have a great benefit that they bring to the business in terms of diversity, enthusiasm, and other aspects like that. So that's something that I think is a lot more difficult to quantify. And I think what Emily's done is trying to, done a lot of that quantification, but there are those unquantifiable benefits as well. So that apprenticeship space for us just gives us one more lever to pull in terms of that war on talent, effectively, that we've got a much wider pool of people that we can go to. We'll still continue to do experienced hires, graduate hires, but apprentices is now a day and daily business as usual part of our model.
And where does Workplus fit into all of this?
Well, for us, as has been alluded to, we've been in Workplus from the very outset. We hire maybe 2 to 3 apprentices a year. So for us to go and find those people in the wider market would be quite a lot of effort. But what Workplus allows us to do, and I maybe misquote the numbers, but Richard can step in and correct me, you might have them a bit handier to, is around 25 employers in the sort of civil engineering sector who work together, a sort of collaborative competition, I think what we're calling it, to pool our efforts in that space and sort of create a critical mass around that demand and publicity. 1 or 2 companies or one company on their own trying to hire 2 or 3 people doesn't necessarily allow us much traction, but when we all work together in that space, that's what Workplus does. It sort of focuses the beam of all of our efforts into one place and allows a single application portal where everybody goes in, and then it allows us to sift through that. So in terms of numbers, and again, Richard will know a lot better than me, but I think we attracted over 200, 250 applications for something like 50 apprenticeship places in the civil engineering sector in the last pass. So what Workplus does for us is it's a lens for us. It allows us and other employers who are working in that sort of consortium to focus our efforts and, as I say, build that critical mass. And we can ultimately, like many things in life, achieve more if we work better together.
Richard, those are pretty good numbers, actually, aren't they?
Yeah, we've been delighted with them, Wendy, and it's really because of businesses like Atkins that we're working with. Martin said that there are 25 civil engineering businesses we're working with, and then we're working with another 20 that are in professional services, IT, manufacturing, and even not-for-profit as well. So we're drawing in this wide range of companies from all sectors that are at all sizes, and some are down into that small business environment that Paul's alluded to. Others are multinationals. So there are lots of businesses are finding at home at Workplus, and it is really about that peer-to-peer support. So Martin will be engaging with other businesses and working out together, how do we create a good culture in our own environment before we bring apprentices in. And next Friday, we're running a mentor training session for the mentors of apprentices, because we realize that is critical to the success of any apprenticeship. We're not just interested in helping companies find them, we also want it to be a successful apprenticeship, because then that apprentice can be a great advocate to the next generation. And then together, as Martin's alluded to, we are better together in that sense, that it makes it an easier target for the potential applicants, whether they're school leavers or they're influencers, parents, careers advisors, or principals, trying to make it easier for them to apply. Because what we see at the minute has been happening is most employers are running it, the recruitment themselves at different times of the year. It's very hard to tune in as an applicant or the influencer. So we're in that space of trying to make it easier for the employers, but also easier for those applicants. And next week we'll be presenting at the Grammar School Principals Conference, and that's not just because we're just targeting grammar school. We're targeting all schools, but we want to go into that space where we're delivering a message to those principals who maybe have never thought about apprenticeships. And actually, off the back of that last one that we did 2 years ago for that same group, I was invited to speak at Methody's Parents' Evening, and that really surprised me. But it was really good to see that culture in a school like Methody, where they're keen to broaden the opportunities for those young people. And then we also run events for parents and have parents of apprentices on panel, and so that parents can come along and explore what it's like to encourage your son or daughter to become an apprentice. So we're trying to think about all those different parts of the system.
I think that's fascinating, actually, about the grammar schools element. And Emily, I know that you were involved very much in school engagement, and I know Paul mentioned that that there's a very good career structure or career teacher structure in schools. But if we're all being honest, most of us went to school here, and most of our schools would never have mentioned anything remotely like an apprenticeship. And I can remember one of my friends at school who went to be a nurse, and after she left, after her GCEs, as they were in those days, they weren't mentioned at prize day because they hadn't gone to university. Is that still a problem, Emily? And how great is it that grammar schools, you probably wouldn't know what method, but it's one of our big grammar schools here in Northern Ireland. We still have that system, the 11 plus and what have you. They must need to be convinced, I would have thought, still.
There's definitely some way to go. I mean, it's moving in the right direction. I can recall one of the first schools engagements I did. I live in Wales, and I'd gone out to a local school as part of my role as Lloyd's Banking Group. And what the teachers had done is put all the pupils in a room who were filling out their UCAS applications to go to university, and anyone deemed not bright enough to go to university came and listened to our talk on apprenticeships. And I can remember at the time feeling horrified and thinking we've got a lot of work to do here. Having said that, sort of the equivalent of grammar schools locally, I've seen even my own children having opportunities for apprenticeships being promoted through their schools. So there is something starting to turn, but it's a long way to go yet, Wendy, and possibly because the people in that system haven't followed the apprenticeship route. They've always done the traditional route. It's really difficult to help them to be aware of what's out there. So yeah, it's still a long way to go.
Need a bit more diversity about there. Jane, I wonder, we were talking about and Richard was talking about the fact that, the Workplus, the idea is that it makes it easier for kind of all sides. Did it make it easier for you? And if so, I wonder why.
Yeah, I think it's really good that there is just one platform that you go to, and there's a whole host of different opportunities at all different levels. So I think that is really beneficial, and it just made it a lot simpler to navigate. Definitely was easier than trying to do the UCAS system. So that was good. And then because I actually am an apprentice now with Workplus, the events that they run, you get to network with other apprentices who are kind of in the same boat. So being part of the Workplus apprenticeship program definitely is beneficial, and they do make it easy.
And I wonder, you've been working for a while now. You've worked on that really big scheme, and I'm sure on many others as well. Where would you like to be? That awful question that they ask you, that they even asked me before I left. Where do you see yourself in 5 years' time? I said on a beach. That's not really the right answer these days. But where would you like to see yourself going, and how do you think that your apprenticeship is going to help you to realise that?
Well, I want to finish my master's first, and a lot of people don't actually realise that apprenticeships can go up to master's level, and I think I even seen at one time it can go up to PhD level. Is that right, Richard? I think it can. So that's obviously beneficial being on this program. So when I finish a master's, then hopefully get chartered, which I can do from the apprenticeship program. And then once I'm done all my education, I hope to do a bit of traveling. And then because Atkins is a global company, I could stay within. So I might be on a beach in 5 years' time if all goes to plan.
I'll see you there. Just a bit of a reminder, by the way, everyone who's here today, all of our companies who are joining us, please do pop your questions on the chat. I'm looking at it at the moment and I'm not seeing any, but I'm hoping that you do have questions that I can put to our panelists, and the things that you really want to find out about. One of the things that I just wondered if I could go back to Richard about was Paul mentioned the fact that so many of our companies are so small here in Northern Ireland, and you talked briefly about the fact that that you're working with those small businesses. What kind of anecdotally is the apprenticeship experience for them, given that we do have so many micro companies, and it might well be that if you have an apprentice, that's almost doubling your workforce.
It is a challenge. So the smallest organization that we're working with has 12 staff. So that's probably the lowest point at which you would be able to bring an apprentice in, when you've got that ratio of regular staff to the apprentice. But as Paul's alluded to, the majority of businesses are even smaller than that. So we actually were commissioned by the Department for the Economy last year to undertake some research into what is called a shared apprenticeship. And that's the idea that someone becomes an apprentice but spends 2 days in one company, 2 days in another, and then 1 day at college or university. And it's that would lower the risk for those micro businesses. So I even think about our own organization. We are a micro business, and people ask me, "Oh, why don't you have an apprentice?" Well, we really couldn't bring them in and give them the mentoring and the support that they might need, because we're in this stage of our own business as a startup. But the idea of having someone 2 days a week who would provide some marketing support, admin support, but a support with finance, those sorts of things. But then they would be employed by a shared apprenticeship agency that would take care of all the admin and the employment contract side. That would be attractive to us to do that. And that's the way in which we would see unlocking it for micro businesses. It's happened in pockets of other countries, but we've put together some research which might actually explore that a bit further. But the businesses that we're working with are learning together, and we have HR managers from direct competitors that are trying to win contracts against each other out there in the commercial sphere, but they're sitting together in a room talking about how can they create this really good culture in their business. How can they convince their finance director or their managing director to bring more apprentices into the business, because they see that they're flourishing and adding a lot of value that we've talked about before. And as I mentioned earlier, on the supply side with the applicants, we're not finding that's an issue. This year, we had 700 applicants in total. Martin mentioned the 250 in civil engineering, but 700 in total, and that turned into 62 apprenticeships. So we have over 600 people that last year walking away disappointed with empty hands. Now, hopefully they found something else, but it's that idea that the supply side, the parents, the young people, the schools, people retraining are won over. We still need to do more, of course, but they're won over more than the employers are won over. And it's about trying to rebalance that supply and demand.
Well, the questions are flooding in now that I've given you all a bit of a prod. So let's have a whiz through them if we possibly can. Christine French would like to know, what way does the apprenticeship levy work in Northern Ireland? Who would like to take that? Paul?
I'll take that one, Wendy. In essence, for those who don't know, apprenticeship levy is in essence a tax paid by organisations with a particular level of turnover, and in England, and the outcome of it is that money can be used towards apprenticeship training. In Northern Ireland, we fund apprenticeship training, but it's done in a different way. So in England, it's through an account. In Northern Ireland, we pay, the department pays the training provider directly. So the truth is there are advantages. There's less administrative and IT infrastructure, but it's the same outcome.
Well, that's interesting to hear, because you know yourself, Paul, that there are lots of employers here who've been banging on for a very long time about how they're paying this levy and they're getting nothing back for it.
Yes, the advantage of the apprenticeship levy is the virtual account, whereby it's not cash, it can't be drawn down as cash, but an employer can see an accumulative value. But ultimately, the authorization is for that virtual money to go to a training provider, whereas we just pay that directly. So and the downside is that employers don't always recognize that an apprenticeship at level 2, level 3 can cost around £8,000. And I accept that an employer in Northern Ireland won't always recognise that that's how much that has been invested on their behalf.
Okay. Siobhan Macaulay from Ablin Insurance, she says, we don't have a current apprenticeship programme, but believe that this is the way forward. Where do we start? Who is the best organisation to start the process with? Richard?
Yeah, well, I'm happy to take that one. Thanks for the question, Siobhan. Maybe it might be useful just at this point if I just share our Apprenticeship Explorer tool, which we've developed. So one of the challenges that we've heard from employers, Siobhan, is it's quite hard to know all the different types of apprenticeship that are out there. As Paul mentioned, they're listed on NI Direct, but it is just a bullet point list. We were trying to provide a bit more context around that, and also allow you in that to express your demand for those types. So if you go to an individual college or university, they will be able to talk to you about the apprenticeships that they deliver, but it's in a way it's like going to a local shop or a local provider. They will have their brilliant goods that they have in their shop, but what we can do is give you access to something which is more like a supermarket approach. So through this platform, you can go in and look at all the different types of apprenticeships. So if you're thinking about, say, software, you can click in here, and then it filters based on software. It tells you who the training providers are, what level it's at, whether it's funded, and then you can go in here and add that to your demand on our platform. What we'll then do, that's done before our campaign opens. It means then that whenever we go out to a campaign through our website, then that means that these are real job opportunities that people are applying for. So this is the time frame that we're working to for this year. So keen to have employers signed up in the next couple of weeks. That would mean that you're in a mail out, which is going out to all 200 post-primary schools. So there are 20,000 leaflets being produced, going out to all the schools, along with a box of chocolates for the head of careers to say thank you for the difficult job that you do. We just hope this makes your life a little bit easier about helping your young people explore apprenticeships. So your logo will go on that if you sign up by the 30th. And then we can go out to that campaign with these real jobs. So that's the way in which we can help support businesses to do that, and also help you prepare your organization to bring those apprentices in. So that's the work that we can do for you, Siobhan.
Great. Emily, I wonder, just maybe you'd like to come in there and answer a bit of what Siobhan's talking about, that where do we start thing, because that takes us back to the changing the narrative, really, doesn't it? And taking that first jump.
Yeah, and I think it's like Richard said, if you've got lucky enough to have access to like a Workplus, that's always a brilliant place to start. And around the UK, there are various sort of, I suppose, equivalent organisations that help make or demystify some of the things that go on in apprenticeships. So, training provider networks, or chambers of commerce, or, could be government-run type organisations that help you sort of go, what's the right answer for me? Because apprenticeships don't always suit as a solution for everything, but absolutely should be part of the mix. And one of the things I would say is, before you go exploring who can help you find the right answer, actually just making sure that your own organisation is bought in, because it's an investment, and that means that from top down, everybody needs to be aware of what's going to be involved and what that return could be. And that makes your life so much easier then as you prepare the organisation for onboarding apprentices and helping them to be successful. So I would definitely say start with the business case internally. And if you've already got that, Siobhan, you're halfway there, I think. And then finding a Workplus or equivalent to help you navigate what's the best programme for me. Does it suit this particular area? How do I recruit and attract people to it? So.
I said right at the very beginning that for anyone who hadn't been involved in this before, it's a whole new ball game, and that does seem to be very much the case. I mean, Louise Dooley has a question here. She says, is there a recommended structure for apprentices on how they spend their time in a manufacturing organisation with approximately 250 employees? We have production, engineering, quality, health and safety, and software engineering teams. So, is there a recommended structure? I mean, Richard, maybe, or Martin, maybe first, would you like to take that, and I'll come back to you then, Richard?
For us, obviously, the model's straightforward in terms of 1 day a week in the college or university and 4 days a week in the workplace. While the apprentice is with us, from a civil engineering pathway point of view, through the Institution of Civil Engineers, we have a sort of approved training programme that our apprentices work on, which helps them on the route to sort of chartership or incorporated engineer status, or a technician status that Jane mentioned. So within our industry, there are pathways, and that pathway is well aligned for us with the educational pathway that's followed within the college or university, and that's very similar to what we do with graduates. So for us, it's a relatively well-trodden path, and I imagine for other industries, there will be similar sort of professional organisations that lay out how new employees are trained and developed within professional organisations like the ICE. So I would say it's probably industry dependent, but again, Richard might have a view on that in terms of working with sectors outside of civil engineering.
Yeah, indeed, and this is kind of specifically a manufacturing organisation, Richard.
Yes, and it's thanks, Louise, for your question. And I know of the work that I think it's Andor, isn't it? So you've got quite a lot of different types of roles there, and there are apprenticeships that can really support that production side and engineering. Once you go into quality and health and safety, there aren't particular apprenticeships for quality or for health and safety. But there are other apprenticeship types, like administrative apprenticeships, that can really do a lot of the core work of those sorts of entry-level roles. And there are apprenticeships for for software engineering. So it seems like there's a good fit there. I think, come back to Martin's point, the importance is, in terms of your own internal structure, is that you'll have someone there to mentor. It's not just someone you're bringing in to run a new product or a new department or something like that. They're coming into an established team, and the team is, as Emily has said, is bought in and ensures that it's going to be fertile ground for the apprentice to flourish.
I mean, it's very clear that we're not talking about kind of cheap labour or quick fixes here. From everything that we've heard from Martin's company perspective, or Paul talking about the government's perspective, apprenticeships are deeply strategic, really, on an organisational level, as well as from a wider economic perspective, Richard.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. It's really hitting a lot of the right notes for organizations, and we've just been delighted to work with so many businesses that are opening their eyes to apprenticeships, and that's as I mentioned already, we've got more applicants than places at this point. So we really would love to be working with businesses that are maybe exploring this for the first time, or maybe want to, as Martin said, it's maybe a more efficient way to do it, working with us, and we'd be delighted to explore that with them.
A couple of other questions popping in here. Roisin McCabe says, Mega has developed an apprenticeship model for engineering and manufacturing companies. I mean, that's very much one of the kind of groups that has got together. I mean, you were talking about grouping as well, Martin. I mean, that's has been very effective, hasn't it? Yeah. Maybe Richard wants to take that.
Yeah, it has. It's been great to see Invest NI and Mid-Ulster District Council investing in that, and also the companies are obviously investing their time, and Roisin's part of that, and it's been really encouraging to see those opportunities, and that's such a growth area, and it's such a focus area for that Mid-Ulster area, and what we're trying to do is to make it across Northern Ireland, across sectors. But yeah, definitely good to see the work of Mega.
We're nearly out of time here, but Julie Wilson's just wondering, she says, apologies if it's already been covered, is there any move on the upper age limit for apprenticeships? Paul looks like the man for that.
Yeah, there is no age restriction on higher level apprenticeships, so that's apprenticeships that start levels 4 and 5 around a foundation degree. Levels 2 and 3, the current restriction, or most of the funding is focused on 16 to 24. Work ongoing in terms of extending to all age, but it'll be into next year before there's an outcome of that. And the truth is, fairly tricky budget negotiations ongoing, so being prioritised alongside lots of other skills issues.
Yeah, well, tricky budget negotiations, I think, are going to be continuing in all kinds of different areas for quite some time. Richard, just to kind of, and Julie says, thanks very much, that's great. So this chat thing's brilliant, isn't it? Things pop up so fast. Anyway, just a kind of final thing. Tell us very briefly, I mean, you and I have been talking about apprenticeships since, I think, the first time that we had you on Inside Business when you were regional director of the Institution of Civil Engineers, and then you went off to plough your own furrow and pursue your goal. I mean, you're messianic about this, aren't you?
I'm not quite sure that's the term, Wendy, but thank you. It was 6 years ago I started working in the area of apprenticeships, and really for me it was hearing the pain and frustration of businesses that were struggling to find good quality talent. And I've had a background working with young people as well outside of work as a volunteer, and listening to schools and parents as well, and really just trying to provide something in the middle which makes it easier for people to take the next step after school, and also gives those businesses more talented people at an earlier stage. So we're really enjoying what we're doing this time of year, especially when we see new apprentices coming in. And we just did some videoing a couple of weeks ago. They're going to go live on YouTube over the next couple of days, and it's those stories which just keep us going at what we're doing from both the employers and from the apprentices. And we're starting to explore working outside Northern Ireland as well, which has been really exciting, working with local authorities in other places to help them run their apprenticeship system more effectively. So we're more and more convinced of it, Wendy. Yes, I left a nice cozy job in 2019, but looking back now, I didn't know COVID was coming, but I'm glad that I did, because I've just seen a huge impact as employers see the benefits of apprenticeships, and then the apprentices are able to start to flourish and find their place in the world in many ways, and that's really what keeps us going here.
Well, more power to your elbow, as they say in this part of the world. It was a great move, I think, from everyone's point of view. I'm going to give the last word from the panel to Jane. You're optimistic for the future, Jane? Looking forward to getting your master's and moving on?
Yes, definitely.
Would you have done it without Workplus, do you think?
I don't think I could have done it without Workplus, no. I just would have been going to full-time university, probably wouldn't have been enjoying it as much, and then struggling to get a job then coming out of COVID. So definitely is the best route for me, you know.
Well, that's great to hear. Finally, you're getting ready to kick off your campaign, Richard, in January. You'll be saying the new year and on your laptop, I'm sure. But I mean, is there still time if companies want to get involved?
Yes, we can still bring companies on board. Wendy, there'll be an email going out after this as well. If anyone wants to explore it a bit further with myself or my colleague Una, we'd be delighted to meet with you. And the deadline of the 30th is really important, because that means that you'll be carried with us as we go into our branding out to the schools. So if you can commit by then, it would be great to work with you.
Look, thanks to all of you very much indeed for your time and for your amazing expertise. I hope everybody else has found it as interesting as I have. My thanks to Paul Bryans, to Martin Harvey, to Emily Austin, to Jane McMonigal, and of course to Richard Kirk from Workplus as well. This is going to be on the Workplus YouTube channel. So if you want to watch it again, or if there are other people that you feel ought to see it, make sure that they have a look at that, and you can keep in touch with Workplus and find out what's happening. But from me, thanks very much. And thanks to all of you on the chat saying thank you. Very interesting. Thanks. Very insightful. Thanks very much. Good to know. I've enjoyed your company today. Have a good day.